Good evening and welcome to this edition of Defacto Review, a weekly roundup of news and current affairs here in Mongolia. I'm Grace Brown, and joining me this evening is Mogi Badral-Bontoy, the founder and CEO of the Cover Mongolia newswire. We're live on Facebook. You can follow us at V Television and join the conversation on Twitter, #Defacto. We begin with the latest revelations in the Paradise Papers, which have shed light on the hidden wealth of the global elite. The leaked offshore accounts database from the tax and legal firm Appleby has concerned more than 120,000 individuals and companies. We now know that there are 16 names from Mongolia on that list as well. So, Mogi, give us some of them.
Sure. There are a few prominent names in the list, not as much as Panama Papers, but as you mentioned, 16 names. There are a few well-known businessmen, like, for example, the son of a former prime minister, who's a current MP as well, Mr. Battushik Batbold. He's the son of the former minister.
Son of, we believe, the son of Su Batbold.
Right.
It's
well,
yet
looking
to
at the
confirmed.
names of the companies, it's pretty sure that it's the son of MP Member of Parliament, Mr. Batbold. So he's taken over the management of the company that his father founded, the Altai Holdings, Altai Group, as we know it. So Altai Holdings owns the Chinggis Khan Hotel, the EMR franchise, as well as a number of other interests as well. So his name is very eye-catching because it could potentially be in breach of the new offshore account law that was passed last year. In that law, it says the highest-ranking politicians and government officials cannot hold any kind of offshore accounts or holdings, as not only just the politician himself,
but also their relatives and their business
yes.
partners.
So him being the direct son of the current sitting member of parliament, it could be raising some eyebrows for our anti-corruption agency. So I'm sure they will have a look at it. So one of the things we have to make sure is that some of these, of course, companies where the documentation, the registration could be old. So, it's the job of the anti-corruption agency to make sure that currently the son of a sitting member of parliament is not holding any kind of offshore companies. So that's just one of the names. There are a few others that former son of a former politician, a prominent businessman as well. Some major...
This is Batishik Batbaya, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Also the son of a former MP, we believe.
Right.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of big company names that were mentioned. For example, the Bodhi Group. They were one of the first big conglomerates.
Yes.
And a sitting member of parliament is the founder of it, Mr. Batbold, Lou Batbold, as we know it. So Bodhi Group is his company. So it could also be, something for the anti-corruption agency to look at. So, and of course, one other major company was Petronas, the largest petroleum distributor, and obviously one of the big companies. And so there's a couple of interesting names in that list that Mongolians will recognize.
Indeed. It's important, of course, to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate reasons for having an offshore account, right? I mean, of course, as you mentioned, under Mongolia's conflicts of interest law, with new amendments taking place in April, any relatives or partners of politicians, along with any politicians themselves who hold offshore assets, need to declare those by the 1st of January next year, correct?
Right. Yes, and then there's a more specific offshore account where a sitting high-ranking politician and a government official cannot hold, and their relatives cannot hold any kind of offshore accounts as well. So there could be something more revelations after.
Right, and anybody who was included in that list needs to disclose this to the International Agency Against Corruption by February next year. So that will be interesting as well. But you know, going back to legitimate versus illegitimate purposes, you know, for many businesses there could be perfectly reasonable,
of course,
reasons why they would have offshore
of course.
accounts, right?
Of course.
Could you run us through some of those?
Sure. You know, as I'm sure viewers will know that offshore is perfectly legal and legitimate business tool that a lot of, I think probably most of the big companies and companies use. So this is something that's relatively new to Mongolia. The offshore, the term offshore has a very bad connotation in Mongolia.
Right, because people associated it with public money.
Right.
That is being used privately and hidden away overseas.
Hiding revenues they've got when they were sitting in government cabinet or parliament.
Yeah.
Hiding their money from tax authorities. So this is something that Mongolia is still learning. The actual term of it, the actual business practicality of it. So. I believe that all of our big major companies use offshore jurisdictions to set up their companies, the structure of it. I know.
Why is that? Why do so many companies here have to set up overseas? Is it because there are certain legal or financial conditions that are more stable overseas?
I would say that. For most of the reasons, they're not setting up offshore companies because they're hiding from the tax authority. I would say that they're protecting their assets from Mongolian government authorities.
Which is really concerning.
Which is, of course, a concerning issue.
So that it's very difficult to really address the issue of offshore accounts and not build a more stable, if you like, onshore environment for accounting in the first place.
Viewers will remember that the local bank accounts of U.Khurelsukh, our largest, biggest mining company, was closed because of some tax issues. So, I mean, obviously looking at that, our businessman would say, okay, if we deposit all of our company assets under Mongolian jurisdiction, it will be under purview of the Mongolian government authorities. So I think it's the main reason why I think all of our big businessmen set up their businesses offshore.
And also, if you need to do business overseas, having a bank account overseas is a practical purpose for an offshore account.
And of course, there are a lot of Mongolian companies who are listed in offshore stock exchanges. And Mongolian company registered in Mongolia cannot list anywhere outside of Mongolia. So, for example, Petrovis is the biggest shareholder of a London Stock Exchange AIM-listed company. So, Petromatat, that is the name.
Yes.
So Petromatat is also, registered in an offshore jurisdiction, I believe in Isle of Man or Jersey in UK. And Petrovis is also a shareholder in Mongolian Mining Corporation, listed in Hong Kong. Hong Kong.
So if they were registered here, it would be very difficult.
Yeah, it would be impossible because Hong Kong Stock Exchange or any other stock exchange does not recognize a Mongolian registered company. So it's a legitimate way of doing business. For some companies, they had no choice but to list their assets offshore. Not offshore, but abroad, so that they could list in a foreign stock exchange. And for most Mongolians, I think anywhere outside of Mongolia is offshore and has that bad image. So you could set up a company in Japan, it would still maybe in the eyes of the Mongolian public, they would probably be considered as offshore and something to
something negative. Yeah. It's very interesting and very important to make that legal versus illegal distinction.
And one other thing I wanted to mention was that this is not an issue just for Mongolia. It's a global thing.
Indeed, even
the whole world
Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, also named in this database. Although the International Consortium for Investigative Journalists did issue a statement to the effect that just because they've named these names does not necessarily mean that anything dodgy has been going on.
And I think the whole world, even some developed countries are sort of reconsidering how their legal environment, for example.
Absolutely.
Apple was one of the prominent names mentioned in the global news, where they used to be domiciled in Ireland, and then Ireland strictened their secrecy laws, and Apple moved away their actual registered headquarters to, I believe Isle of Man or Jersey, I believe.
Yeah.
So, and then Apple says they're the world's biggest taxpayer, but if it's a proper business, would probably even pay more taxes. They should have paid more taxes. That's the argument. But obviously, Apple says they're following the law, and that is true. And perhaps some of the developed countries,
we need to consider also legal reforms.
Right. So
because just because it's legal doesn't mean it's necessarily right.
Right. And I think this sort of push needs to come from the developed countries themselves. I think they would have the ultimate power to negotiate with major, powerful companies. Companies that are more powerful than a mid-sized country. So I think that's where the push needs to be. And for one example, using Mongolia as an example, every country pays Facebook for promoted sponsored tweet posts, right?
Yes.
And Mongolia probably pays a lot of, maybe thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to Facebook as well. So you would think that because the transaction happened in Mongolia, someone living in Mongolia pays their local international card to pay for a Facebook feed. So shouldn't Facebook be paying taxes on that revenue to Mongolia? And this is something that's probably
still
issue or concern for every country.
Yeah. Oh, it's very, very interesting. Well, moving on, Mongolia's Prime Minister, U.Khurelsukh, was elected as head of the ruling Mongolian People's Party this week after its Congress. He won 63% of that vote. He's promising to fight corruption and strengthen government institutions. Does this dual power give him more ability to do that?
Definitely. But
so we can expect more economic and political stability, maybe?
Yes, political stability-wise, this is a good news for Mongolia, and I think and for international and for foreign investors as well. But I wouldn't completely rule out any kind of trouble. I think it alleviates some of the political uncertainty we've had over the past several months after the presidential election.
There's been a lot of turbulence in the MPP since then.
And U.Khurelsukh himself, who sort of started the rebellion within his own party, managed to become party chairman. So that's good news for stability-wise. But some of the other faction from the MPP already were not shy from giving warning to U.Khurelsukh, saying that if he does not live up to his promises, we're not going to rule out holding another Congress to elect the new chairman. So does
this include his predecessor, the former chair and former presidential candidate Miagombo Enkhbald, and what's going to happen with him?
He'll probably remain. I think the deal was Enkhbald will remain as parliament speaker.
Yeah.
But some of the previous cabinet ministers, one of them specifically mentioned, I saw him giving an interview saying that things are not going to be easy for him. Unity-wise, that's good. The ruling party is coming together, but I wouldn't the ruling party caucus is split in two. That doesn't mean they're back into becoming one caucus. I think there's still some of that animosity and between each other. So things are getting better, but I wouldn't rule out rule out any kind of unity.
Further conflicts. Interesting. He was also the leader of the MPP's youth division, right?
Yeah.
And the president of Ulaanbaatar's Harley-Davidson Society. Can we expect perhaps a more youthful influence in the MPP as a result of him becoming chair?
Yes, I believe so. U.Khurelsukh was sort of the front face of the new young wing of MPP. He established the youth association of MPP. So a lot of his support is from that people who graduated from that youth association. There's a lot of young MPs in parliament. I think they got elected because they came from his sort of faction within the party. So yes, I would agree that there'd be more youthful wing, maybe beginning or the middle of a generational change in a 80-year-old political party. So yeah, it's moving ahead, and any kind of revolution, needs, you have to force a revolution. Nothing's gonna happen just because you're young and your predecessors are old. So he did that. He created a revolution within his party and managed to come out on top. So kudos to him.
Well, that's certainly some good news if more young people are getting involved in politics. In fact, the opposition Democratic Party also held elections for its youth group. The Mongolian Democratic Youth Union elected a new leader this week, Erdenbold. So clearly, young people are getting engaged in politics here. I mean, we saw the effect they had on the presidential elections when their widespread disenchantment with the candidates led to 10% of the ballots coming out blank. Do you think that we'll see more young people in politics by, say, the 2020 general election?
I believe so. So this would be 2020 would be 30 years after the Democratic Revolution, and we associate the old sort of the guard with people born in 50s and 60s, and those are the ones in power right now.
Yes.
And they would have been in
lived
college
through communism.
They would have lived all of their childhood under communism and probably early adulthood. So there'll be a very big generational change coming in 2020, I think in 2024, where only a lot of new candidates will be people who probably never experienced communism before. So this will be a big change in Mongolia. The way they support democracy or the way that governments should work, I think there'll be a big cultural change coming soon.
That's really, really fascinating. Well, in other news this week, official data shows that Mongolia's car imports have surged by more than a third. There were 43,000 new vehicles imported in the first 10 months of this year. It seems that there's been a recovery in the economy, right? And that's what's driving these greater vehicle sales.
But on top of that, it's import tariffs are now zero for new Japanese imports.
That's because of the economic partnership agreement between the two countries. Okay.
So cars that are 0 to 3-year-old cars have zero import duty from last year. I believe 4 to 8-year-old cars are their tariffs are lowered incrementally. I think that also played into why there's car import increased. And if you look at the numbers, most of it is from Japan.
Yes, that's right. 90% of those imports are indeed from Japan. So more Priuses, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in addition, there was according to the Mongolian Automobile Distribution Association, a 80% jump in trucks. So it seems that these are the sort of heavy-duty vehicles that you see down on mining sites. So clearly, there's also been a pickup in mining opportunities and foreign investment, perhaps, that's driving this.
As viewers will know that starting from last year, coal export jumps significantly, and all of those coals are trucked to China. So because coal export picked up, it's probably why big heavy-duty trucks import also increased, because cars are there's big traffic jam south of the border. More companies increasing their production. And that's probably why we see a big surge in import of trucks. Yeah.
So maybe more traffic jams to come
along
that border. But going back to Priuses, why are Priuses so popular here, given that it seems a little counterintuitive? They're not exactly the hardiest of cars. They're quite diminutive two-wheel drives. And 10% of Mongolia has roads, the other 90% is unpaved.
Right. Well, I think there's two main reasons why Prius is very popular in Mongolia. I saw a number saying that more than 20% of all the cars in Mongolia are Toyota Priuses. And it's by far the biggest imported car model. One reason, it's cheap. Second reason, I think it's cheap to buy, and it's cheap on fuel.
Yes.
Because it's hybrid, so it uses less fuel. It's cheap because hybrid cars, you pay less tax on a hybrid car. And third, because it has a big battery, it doesn't freeze in winter.
That's right. Whereas a Land Cruiser could take some time to start off in minus 40 degrees.
And if you leave it out at minus 30 degrees for maybe 10 hours, even the Land Cruiser, I think, will not start. But a Toyota Prius will start because it has a very big battery.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, there are a lot of pros to the Prius, but what about the cons? There are definitely risks.
So cons, I think it's an issue that's sort of becoming known to public, which is the environmental impact of those old disposed of batteries. And those batteries, if you leave it out, it's okay. But if once it starts degrading, there's a lot of dangerous chemicals inside those batteries. So Mongolia does not have a law saying how we should deal with it. If you own a Prius, maybe perhaps you should pay an extra tax so that the government can handle the discarded batteries.
Afterwards.
So there's no legal environment for it to do that. So
that's interesting. And also the steering wheels, right? Because Japan drives on the left, along with India, Australia, and South Africa. But Mongolia, like many European countries, drives on the right.
Right.
So how does that affect
so
safety?
that's an even bigger issue than Priuses. More than 50% of, I believe 60% of all the cars in Mongolia are, the right-hand drive, meaning it's a wrong hand drive. So that creates in itself its own problems where, there's more accident, I think the traffic police gave us statistics where more than majority of all the accidents in the road are caused by right-hand drive cars.
Because they can't see when they need to
overpass. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's an issue that we cannot. The government, obviously, if you look at it, the government, they could just say we're not going to import right-hand drive cars anymore. But obviously, because imported cars from Japan are very cheap, and people driving right-hand cars are mostly from middle to lower income households. So Priuses are big income driver of a lot of people because they use their cars as makeshift taxis. So it'll be very tough politically to ban right-hand drive cars. They try to increase import tariffs on Toyota Priuses. But we had a big protest where even one Prius was burned up in Central Square protesting those. And the government had to back down.
There's even a movie, right, that's been made about how popular Priuses are. What is it called? The King
I forgot, but
Prius?
There's a local joke saying that if you throw a rock anywhere in any direction, chances are it'll hit a Prius. You'll hit a Prius, yeah. And that's true. If you look at the road, 20, 30, even 40% of all the cars are Toyota Priuses. Right.
Well, very interesting indeed, the pros and cons of Priuses. And finally, another unexpected icon in Mongolia this week was the Hollywood star Richard Gere. He visited the country with his girlfriend, Alejandra Silva, the Hollywood actor, starred in Pretty Woman, Chicago, and American Gigolo. They visited the State Palace and were reportedly here for other reasons too. Can you fill us in on that, Moggy?
Sure. Well, I think Mongolians know Richard Gere. Well, they know him as a Hollywood star, but more than that, I think they know Richard Gere because Richard Gere is a big, prominent Buddhist and supports Tibetan independence. Is a close friend of Dalai Lama.
And Tibetan Buddhism is the main religion here,
exactly.
Right?
So I think, I think some of the news sites said that he came here to talk about filming a movie about the Buddhist movement in Mongolia or something like that. So I think the Chinese embassy is closely looking at what he's doing in Mongolia because Richard Gere is banned in China apparently because he supports Tibetan independence.
It follows him making a surprise denouncement of the Chinese Communist Party at the Oscars back in 1993.
He's banned from the Oscars apparently.
Yes, he was banned from the Academy Awards for presenting at the Academy Awards for 20 years. But he's been back since. But China has maintained its ban. He also attempted to create a boycott of the Beijing Olympics of 2008. Right. So, yes, he called for the then Chinese leader in 1993, Deng Xiaoping, to allow Tibet independence. So, unlikely he will ever
succeed, right?
Visit Tibet in the near future. But he's chairman of several free Tibet movements, and coming here, I suppose it gives him more chance to connect with Tibetan Buddhism, as well as you mentioned researching for his film. It's actually his 4th visit to Mongolia.
Yeah, which is probably the most out of any Hollywood star.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, if indeed he does manage to get the backing to make a film here, which is still unlikely given that he says many big Hollywood studios have actually blacklisted him because they fear losing out on the world's
Chinese
biggest movie market. But if he does indeed make a film here, is Mongolia ready to become a film set? What more is needed to attract filmmakers to come here?
I think it's just the sort of the legal and tax environment for, I think, films. I think Mongolia, I mean, it's a lot of land. I think a lot of movies could be shot here, maybe even space movies could be, science fiction movies could be filmed here.
Yeah, it's a spectacular setting.
For example, a Marco Polo series on Netflix. They chose, it's about Mongolian Empire, Mongolia, things happen in Mongolia.
But much of that had to be filmed in Malaysia.
Malaysia and Kazakhstan, apparently.
Yes, because lacking what? Infrastructure, roads,
and all I think the
tax
staff,
incentives,
and the staff. There's a lot of staff involved in shooting a film, right? And a lack of maybe experienced professional fixers. Yeah, so I think it's something that we could future industry in Mongolia.
It will certainly help to boost tourism.
It will,
that would be cool. Well, lots of potential, and we'll see what happens with that. But for now, that's all for this edition of Defacto Review. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you can tune in again next week. From Moggy and myself, Sachin Amrare. Good night.
Good night.